Well, I think there has got to be a road to majority rule. I think there must be built-in safeguards for the Europeans. They have done an enormous amount in this country. Whether this can be achieved or not, I don't know.
I think we've probably got the right pressures on us to force a settlement, but I think we're wrong if it is forced on us.
Well, the situation is critical for Rhodesia, it's critical for South Africa, and I must emphasize it's critical for the African continent. Ever since Portugal capitulated, the writing has been on the wall that communism would quite possibly spread, and now that has been proved decisively by the Angolan situation. And I think Rhodesians are now aware that there is an almighty problem and that something has got to be done.
I think we've all been worried from time to time over the last 10 years. That now we're a bit sort of take it as it comes. But obviously things are worse than they have been.
I personally think that the situation is getting out of hand. The scene is quite hot, and if anything, any agreement is to be reached, it's got to be now or never.
In Rhodesia, there's a new urgency in the air as whites and blacks consider a future that looks more difficult and dangerous with every passing day. The central issue, of course, is who is to rule the country, the white minority or the black majority. For several months now, Premier Ian Smith has been trying to find a solution with African leader Joshua Nkomo. They've been trying to hammer out a new constitution for Rhodesia, but so far it's proved impossible. Mr. Smith's determined to resist immediate majority rule, and Mr. Nkomo can't settle for less. Mr. Nkomo's position is made more difficult because he's not the only African leader. Rival claimants include Mr. Sithole and Bishop Muzorewa. But as the only leader now dealing with Mr. Smith, Mr. Nkomo has been trying to make his appeal as broad as possible. When the talks started last December, he stated his aims like this.
It is our hope that a constitution which will emerge from the conference will be a constitution that will build a non-racial nation where the color of a person will be of no consequence. We hope and believe that all our people shall, from today, dedicate themselves to building of a nation where hate shall be replaced by love and mutual trust, where exploitation of men by men shall be replaced by working together for the common good, where racialism and tribalism shall be replaced by a common nationality completely divorced from these evils. That is to say,
as far as white Rhodesians are concerned, any progress Mr. Nkomo makes towards those ideals will be at their expense, and few of them are willing to hand over the power and wealth they now enjoy. There are roughly 250,000 whites, and they're outnumbered 20 to 1 by the country's 6 million blacks. But the bulk of political power is in white hands, and so too is the good life. In terms of housing, swimming pools and servants, white Rhodesians have one of the highest standards of living in the world, and it's scarcely surprising that they want to hang on to it. When Mr. Smith has opposed majority rule on the grounds of preserving standards of civilization, it's not been difficult for his white supporters to see what he means. This prosperity is all the more remarkable because it's been maintained throughout 11 years of economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations. The sanctions were to bring Rhodesia to its knees, but they never worked, and proof, if any is still needed, is here in this department store in Salisbury. It's just spent £1.25 million Rhodesian dollars. That's nearly £1 million sterling on refitting 2 floors. The latest women's fashions would once have come from London, but these clothes are all made here, and 40% of the cloth's local too. It's been an object lesson in self-reliance, but from now on, Rhodesia's economic struggle is going to be a lot harder. The reason's here, along Rhodesia's eastern border with Mozambique. A few weeks ago, Mozambique President Samora Machel announced he was joining in the UN sanctions by closing the whole 700-mile border, thus cutting off the main outlets for Rhodesia's exports. Closing the road links was serious enough, but the main damage has been done by blocking the rail links, which took 60% of Rhodesia's exports to the ports of Beira and Lourenço Marques, now known as Maputo. £23 million of rolling stock was also seized. It's meant that Rhodesia is now more dependent than ever on the far longer routes down through South Africa to the Cape. One of the main problems is security. The line is at times only 80 miles from Mozambique and a vulnerable target for guerrillas operating from there. Bight Bridge, where it crosses into South Africa, is now a military area, guarded on both sides by sandbagged machine gun posts. Apart from security, the other main headache is capacity. Even though Rhodesia decreased its dependence on Mozambique after the Portuguese departure, it still moved 1.5 million tons of exports through the 2 ports, together with 500,000 tons of imports. Finding room for all that new traffic isn't going to be easy for the South Africans, who already suffer from congestion both along the line, such as here in Johannesburg, and at the ports. A final drawback is that this longer haul, nearly 3 times the distance in fact, means Rhodesian exports will be less competitive and imports too will be dearer. But from now on, there'll simply be no alternative. Rhodesian troops sit and chuckle at a pair of comedians who've come, ironically, from Britain. There have been few other morale boosters from the home country in recent years. The Rhodesians are, in fact, taking the security threat very seriously indeed. These are new recruits at the light infantry barracks outside Salisbury, latest additions to a regular army which is now 4,500 strong. The army is dominated by whites, but there are black recruits too. The Rhodesian forces have always prided themselves on their physical fitness, and they'll certainly need to be fit if they're to cope with the growing threat from guerrillas. Although the security forces are multiracial, they are dominated by whites, especially at the command levels. But the government's just agreed, in principle, that blacks too can be officers.
Feet together. Exercise. Ready. Sport. Up and down. Up. Down. Up. Down. Work together. Up. Down.
The regulars are backed up by 10,000 territorial reservists who can spend up to 2 months a year in uniform. There's also a police force of 7,000 with a reserve of 25,000. It looks as if they'll all be needed, for according to the military textbooks, it'll take 10 of these men to oppose every one guerrilla who comes across the border.
Position change. What I want you to do, shout up.
On patrol along the Mozambique border, Rhodesian units are led by a hippo, a strangely armoured truck which serves as a minesweeper. It's a necessary precaution since landmines are one of the guerrillas' favourite weapons. Protecting border villages against guerrillas has always been a problem, and the Rhodesians have decided to use a technique tried out by the British in Malaya and later by the Americans in Vietnam. Scattered villagers are gathered into guarded settlements so that fewer troops are needed to maintain security in the area. The Rhodesians believe they're facing 1,000 guerrillas within their own borders and some 4,000 operating from either Mozambique or Zambia. But Western intelligence puts this second figure at more like 16,000. During the week, many of the villages are deserted except for children and mothers, since most of the men go off to work in the towns. Agricultural production has dropped on the whole, but an effort is now being made to remedy that. The whole farming year, from planting to harvesting, now takes place under armed guards. Most of the troops used here are from the Rhodesian African Rifles. It's an essential task, but it uses up a lot of soldiers who would otherwise be available for fighting, which is one reason why the forces as a whole are being expanded. The degree of security depends on whether the village is classed as consolidated or protected. In the protected ones, like this, the atmosphere's more like a military camp. The scheme's been in operation for almost a year now, and the government claims it's made a tremendous contribution to security, and it's the Africans who've benefited most. Officials point out that it's the villagers themselves who asked for the protection in the first place. Many villagers in the border areas, they say, have been intimidated and even murdered by guerrillas in search of more recruits, food and shelter. Nobody's forced to live in a protected village, but once they're in, they've got to obey all the rules. And that means submitting to daily searches as they come in from work in the fields. It's not always a serious matter, but nobody gets through without being searched. Officials admit that in the area as a whole, 1 villager in 5 supports the guerrillas. Protecting the white population in the area is a different matter altogether. The farms are widely scattered, and so they've had to provide their own security. The Lloyd's farm is typical. Denise Lloyd's husband is away on army service, so she's responsible for day-to-day running of it until he gets back. One of the first jobs of the day is opening gates of the steel fence which surrounds the house, the only physical protection for herself and her daughter. There's more protection here, though, a radio link with the local police.
Control 75, over. 75, please activate the alarm. 75, over.
Down on the farm, the African workers wait for Denise to organize the day's farming. This morning, though, there's a problem. The workers tell her that someone was in the African compound last night stealing food. It could have been guerrillas, for many farms in the area have been attacked lately. This time, though, it was only one man in search of nothing more than food. Even so, the incident's not the kind that builds up confidence in a woman on her own.
Never mind about that. Then, listen, you've been living here for what?
We asked Denise Lloyd how she felt after coping with the situation for 5 weeks.
Well, reasonably happy. No fear so far. And I mean, he comes back on Friday. We're all aware of the problems in the area, but up to now it hasn't directly affected us. So it's just one of the things we know about, are aware about, but aren't all that perturbed about.
You frightened at all?
No, not at all. I go to bed at 7:45 at night, and I don't get up until 5, and I don't wake up except to see to children. The security situation isn't something we just talk about anyway. Everybody has their work to do. That's the main topic in any farming community.
Do you think you really know what is going on?
Or perhaps put it this way, as enough as is good for me. That's about all I can say on it. They give us briefings. They tell us exactly what has happened in the area, which I feel is enough.
In fact, Rhodesian security forces have more than held their own. Since 1972, they've inflicted heavy losses, scoring 10 kills for every man lost. Private Patrick Jackson was one of the first coloured Rhodesians to be killed on border patrol when his vehicle was blown up by a mine. The full military funeral in Salisbury's old pioneer cemetery was exactly the same as would have been accorded a white army hero. But while he was alive, Private Jackson did face discrimination, as did all non-white soldiers. Until recently, they couldn't be commissioned, and they weren't allowed to serve in the front line. As the 18-year-old private's family mourned, they may have wondered why coloureds are involved at all. Like Europeans, they are liable to conscription. But unlike whites, they can't be said to be fighting to preserve a privileged way of life, for non-whites have far less to lose. White Rhodesians say they've given the non-whites a new civilized way of life, but it's only a tantalizing glimpse of what might be. Certainly there's been help with education, health, welfare. Few black Rhodesians are starving, and most are well clothed, for it's a prosperous country. But there's still an enormous gulf between the expectations of whites and blacks. Even when blacks are lucky enough to get similar jobs to whites, they get less than half the salary. Though apartheid here isn't as rigid as it is in South Africa, non-whites still can't eat, travel, play or set up home as they please. In many cases, they've abandoned the simple life they were born to, only to face the shortcomings of civilization. Unemployment's one example. For while 40,000 Africans a year leave school, the labour market can't absorb anything like as many. If the trend continues, by 1980, 6 out of 7.5 million blacks will be making no contribution at all to the economy. As it is, well-qualified and enterprising Africans often end up doing mundane jobs like shoe repairing to help pay their way. Fortunately for cobblers in Salisbury, there's no shortage of customers. For others, though, life's far more demeaning. On the outskirts of Salisbury is the municipal dump. Here, scores of scavengers make a living sifting through the garbage brought from the kitchens of the capital's plush white suburbs. The scroungers are partly the byproduct of sanctions which have forced Rhodesia into a closed economy without the foreign investment necessary for long-term industrial growth and the jobs that would go with it. But ironically, sanctions can also take the credit for giving the scavengers a market. For with glass and plastic now in short supply, they're able to sell bottles, jars and packaging back to several major manufacturers for reuse, and so earn a kind of living. The people who live here in the Harare district outside Salisbury are also out of work. They haven't the money for proper homes, so they make do with makeshift lean-tos of timber and plastic sheeting. Huge families are often found crowding into shacks and lean-tos in the Harare district. But the people are not natural slum dwellers. They are just typical of those caught out by Rhodesia's black unemployment problem. Among the whites, there is no unemployment. Not surprisingly, it's a situation which breeds bitterness among some blacks who've seen white settlers arrive with little more than a suitcase and walk into easy jobs, a home and a car. Of course, some non-whites do fare better than those living from hand to mouth in shanties. This is one of the smarter areas outside the capital. The houses and apartments are owned by coloureds, tradesmen and business people who've persevered and prospered in a society which only grudgingly accepts them. But these coloureds are the exceptions rather than the rule, and the homes they've had built here, sometimes architect-designed, are one way of thumbing their noses at both the Europeans and the blacks. Handsome though some of the homes may be, they can only be constructed in strictly defined areas, and non-whites daring to try to live in a white zone face stiff legal action. Just down the road from the Harare district, on the fringe of a black township. Here the bungalows aren't nearly so desirable. The deeper into the township, the lower the income and the poorer the housing. Just as the coloureds are zoned, so are the black communities in townships like Harare, Highfields and Glenora. There's little of the despair or apathy found in western city ghettos. Here the people are generally happy-go-lucky, but they are becoming more convinced that if they ran their country for themselves, there'd be a better life for them and a chance to get away from the rows of drab, barrack-like blocks of the township and the pattern of living they impose. This is Highfield Township, and a scene that's repeated every morning from as early as 4 o'clock. It's then that the daily exodus begins, out of the dormitory towns and into the city of Salisbury, either to work or look for work. For blacks, jobs begin before 8, but they often get there much earlier. It makes for a long day, but it's the only way to make sure of a place on the convoy of buses which ferries the workforce to and fro. Since the imposition of sanctions, there have been fewer buses and fewer trips, but the twice-daily operation's still a mammoth undertaking. This garden boy is lucky. He has a steady job. But recently, when he was warned about the standard of his work, 2 other blacks promptly arrived to ask whether there would soon be a vacancy. Unemployment, a regulated and restricted way of life. 2 of the reasons for the black man's mounting discontent, his growing desire to decide his own future. That and events elsewhere in Africa. And if this means that times are dangerous for whites, they're also frustrating for blacks. There's a new kind of discrimination. Now, blacks seeking work are finding they have to satisfy another requirement. To get a job, they have to be supporters of an acceptable African leader. Many whites will only consider them if they back Joshua Nkomo, while followers of the militant Bishop Muzorewa are turned away. As news of Mozambique's hardening attitude came to Salisbury, we found Africans more and more in favor of Muzorewa. They referred scornfully to Nkomo as a white African who was pussyfooting with Mr. Smith. A prominent African barrister, Sotai Katseri, explained how the majority of Rhodesian blacks were taking the news of growing hostility from Mozambique.
I wouldn't speak for all the Africans, but I can give you my own views. My own view is that it's folly for the Rhodesian whites to take such a dramatic situation complacently. They are comforting themselves in the thought that a miracle will happen and that events won't follow the course that they indicate they are going to take. But my own view is that it's quite clear that the liberation struggle has gone into top gear, and the whites are definitely on the losing side now. There is no question of saving white supremacy in this part of the world. I think that's gone.